Well, hello everybody, and a really warm welcome to the first module in our Virtual Academy of Large-Scale Change webinar series, which today features Systems Leadership in Large-Scale Change. My name is Elaine Bayliss, Senior Improvement Manager in the NHS England Sustainable Improvement Team, and I have the pleasure of hosting this webinar today, working with others in the SI team to support our external speaker in the delivery of this session. So joining me today, as you can see on the screen, are Ian Smith, who's our Programme Lead for Improvement Methodology and our expert practitioner in all things lean, and my colleague Michael Anderson and Rachel Gray, who's rather shy, so hasn't got her photograph on the screen, who will be providing us with chat box support and also expert webinar technical support in the background should we need it. Now, it gives me very great pleasure to introduce to you our expert speaker today, Debbie Sorkin. Debbie is the National Director of Systems Leadership at the Leadership Centre. And for those of you that don't know, the Leadership Centre is a national charity housed in the Local Government Association. The centre specialises in strengthening leadership across public services with a strong focus on collaborative leadership in political and complex environments. It's currently working with NHS providers, commissioners, local and national government, public health, housing, the built environment and social care. So we're in very good hands with Debbie in understanding systems leadership across complex boundaries. So Debbie, without any further interruption from myself, I'll pass over to yourself.
Thank you very much, Elaine. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much, first of all, for making the time to come to today's webinar. It's great, if I'm honest, also faintly terrifying to have so many of you on the session. I thought we'd use the session today to start to think about what it means to lead and to try and get change when you're not in an organisation, but in a system. So where it's complex, where it might be political, large or small p, where there will be no end of external commentators on what you're doing and no end of internal constraints. So this is about what works. It's drawing on behaviours and actions that actually help enable change. It will draw on research, both national and international, but mainly on practice, particularly around the NHS, with a real emphasis on practicalities, do's and don'ts, what works, and also what doesn't. I'm hoping it will also be a very interactive session as well, so there'll be a chance for you to both feedback and ask questions and put your views, and we'll have some polls as part of the session. So if that's all right with you, I'll begin. Most of the examples that I use will be drawn from the NHS and social care, but I wanted to start in a different part of the forest. Many of you will recognise the lady in the photograph. This is Laura Trott, as was, collecting one of her gold medals at the Rio Olympics last year. And I used the photograph, despite all the shenanigans that have gone on with British cycling more recently, to make a point. If you follow British cycling or any elite sport, you will know that they became champions, world champions, Olympic champions, not because they just suddenly did one big thing and they were suddenly champions. They made lots and lots of small changes, often very low-tech and unglamorous changes. So, for example, changing the paint on the bikes because it was infinitesimally thinner and could make a small gain at the margins. And systems leadership is about marginal gains. It's about making progress at the margins and accumulating small improvements. And it's about thinking about margins not just in terms of limits, but also in terms of boundaries. Fundamentally, systems leadership is how you lead across boundaries. So departmental boundaries within an organisation, between professions, or between sectors. So it's fundamentally how you lead when you are not in charge. And when all your plans, for example, for STPs, come up against those two things of real life and other people who have different perspectives and priorities and sometimes even language to you, language incidentally, especially when they're using the same words. and who really annoyingly do not see it as their job to simply unite around your position. So systems leadership is a brilliant tool, I think, to have in your armoury. When you're seeking to influence other people, when you're seeking to change the way people think, when you're looking to get your voice heard and a place at the table as of right, not as a supplicant. Which is not to say that it's a silver bullet, but we know that it works. For the past 4 years, as Elaine has mentioned, there's been a National Systems Leadership Programme. And we know from the evidence from the programme and from independent evaluation that it can work. It changes the way people think and therefore the way they behave and therefore ultimately what happens on the ground. And as the evidence base has grown, it's been increasingly taken up and you're increasingly likely to come across it or to come across the phrase. So if you're working with public health, you'll find systems leadership is within their workforce development plan. If you're working with local authorities, they're often very used to working in this way. And the NHS in its planning guidance at the end of last year specifically mentioned systems approaches and systems leadership and said this will be needed if we are going to make STPs a reality.
And if I think about why this is, and why systems leadership, why now? Sorry, I'm just trying to get to the next slide. I think it's because systems leadership goes with the grain. It goes with reality that people are experiencing, which is another way of saying that it goes with complexity. Now, by complexity, I don't mean that things are just complicated. Open heart surgery is complicated, takes a high degree of skill, very large teams, lots of risk, lots of things can go wrong. But the key thing is we know how to do open heart surgery. We've done it before. There are tried and tested protocols. If you follow these, you are more likely to have success. In a complex situation, by contrast, it will be new. You won't know what to do. There'll be no tried and tested way of working or manual you can take off the shelf. And sometimes the best thing to do is actually to say, this is new, no one knows what to do, can we all get together and think about a way forward to make some progress? Or complex situations can be what's sometimes called recalcitrant. In other words, you've got rubbish processes and rubbish systems, but everybody knows them and everybody's used to them, so everybody works around them. Or they've been around for ages, nothing tries to make any difference. We see this all the time in A&E. They'll involve lots and lots of different people and organisations and sectors, likely to be a political dimension, and that can be MPs or councillors, or it can be people in your own departments. No one person seems to be in charge, irrespective of what it says on their job title. You don't quite know how to describe the issue, or you think you've nailed it, and then it suddenly shifts shape and changes. Or sometimes you're feeling very much on the outside, banging on the glass and trying to look in. So these are what complex issues, sometimes called wicked issues, can feel like. I said at the start that this would be an interactive session, and I'd like to start the interactive aspect of this right here and right now. If you take a look at these ways of describing complex issues, so something that's new, or where you've got suboptimal systems, or there's lots and lots of people around, or there's lots and lots of political issues, or stuff that's been around forever. Does this describe any issues that you're currently working with at all? If you can use the megaphone to either tick for green if this describes you, or cross if, of course, you know exactly what you're doing and it's not complex at all. We'd just like to get a sense of how many people on the call are actually facing complex issues at the moment. So if I can hand things over to you, if you'd like to put a green tick, if this applies to you, please do, and then we'll see how many do. So I'll give you a few moments to do that.
Thanks, Debbie. So for those folk that might not have used the green tick before, if you just look under the list on the right-hand side where you've got the list of attendees, you'll see a little megaphone icon next to the hand icon. If you click on there, then you'll find the green tick and you can post your thoughts back to Debbie. We've also got some folk feeding back in the chat box, Debbie, which is helpful.
Great. Brilliant. Right, Rachel, can I ask you how many green ticks we've had so far compared to red crosses?
Right, just having a look at the feedback, we've got lots and lots of green ticks, no red crosses as yet, which is fantastic.
Great, brilliant. Well, this hopefully this will be for you, and there'll be something helpful to take out of this afternoon's session. I just want to move on. If you think about why these things are complex, it's partly because of the nature of the issues themselves. They're deep-seated, multi-level, involve lots and lots of different people, and they're often quite historic. Sometimes it's also because of the money. As the money contracts, the people also contract into their own shells quite commonly, rather than thinking about how they might work differently. And it's also because the ground isn't always steady underneath our feet at the moment. There are lots and lots of uncertainties in the external environment. But where you've got complex issues, you've got issues that are difficult, I would really advise you, give yourselves a break. Acknowledge that what you're doing is really, really hard. And when you've got things that are difficult and hard and keep on being hard, there's an awful tendency to try and avoid them, to just brush them to one side, say, oh, please, somebody just take this away and just solve it. Just write me a report, just go and deal with it. In other words, to avoid real work. There are three things to watch for here. One is a flight to default behaviours. So everybody should be doing everything they can to meet the 4-hour target in A&E, for example, as per David Dalton and Jim Mackey a couple of weeks ago, irrespective of the circumstances that make that very difficult at the moment. Or you get a flight to mantras. If we just have integration, everything will be fine. If we just have an accountable care system, that will solve all our ills. But integration, often seen in terms of structures rather than in terms of cultures and relationships. And I sometimes liken integration in this way to one of those stolen cars, where you put the front end of one car together with the back end of another car and you think you've got a car, but you haven't. You've got a ringer. And it will fall apart at that cultural weld where you haven't done the work in relationship building that would actually make integration work. The other thing to watch for is a flight to obscure or bizarre language. This is sort of right across the board, but my warning mantra is, if it sounds like guff, it probably is. If you're being asked to write it, notice this. So, for example, in the NHS Next Steps on the 5-year forward view, you don't say, actually, we're going to have to think long and hard before we go forward with sustainability and transformation partnerships and make them work in practice. No, you say, to succeed, all STPs will need a basic governance and implementation support chassis to enable this type of effective working. This is the kind of thing I mean. Watch for default behaviours, mantras, and obscure language. They are all ways of avoiding real work. And you can do this. Or you can say, enough already. We are going to face complexity head on and we are going to work with it. I sometimes describe anybody working in the NHS or other public services as being in a situation where you are being asked to untangle a really slippery rope while standing on a wobble board and being shouted at through a megaphone all at the same time. And I think the great thing about using systems leadership to help you in these situations is that it at least gets you off the wobble board and onto solid ground. And it does this because of the way it's defined. Systems leadership is about collaborative leadership of a network of people. So not an organization, not a hierarchy, a network of people, different places, different levels,
and working on the basis of a shared endeavour, a common purpose. This is really important. A common purpose where you've really gone through it in detail and you all absolutely understand what it is that you want to do. It is worth going slow to go fast to get there. Everywhere where we've seen this work, people have done that and teased out what the meanings are. Everywhere where it's fallen over, people have rushed off, thought they'd had a shared endeavour, but actually haven't. And it's not about a shared endeavour in pursuit of the status quo. This is about cooperating to make a significant change, a large-scale change. And we sometimes say, if you want a different answer, start with a different question. Not how much money have we got, how much money have I got, how much money have you got, oh, you've got less money than I've got, you're going to want my money. Start with the question, what do we want services to be like for people in our place? So, could be A&E services, services for older people, services for people with diabetes, services for children. It doesn't matter what the services are and who the people are. The key thing that it's a question in the round, it matters to you and it matters to people in your place because you are most likely to be there for the long haul. And if you ask an open-ended question like that, you can also think of who isn't in the room, who needs to be, besides the usual suspects. So don't start with structures and hierarchies or governance or money or what I call whack-a-mole. This is the idea when you have lots and lots of different projects and you do one project and then you just do another project and you do another project and you don't think about what the underlying issues are. Start with relationships. The relationships that you have with other people and the trust that you thereby build up, which enables you to have influence and get people to really hear what you're saying and thereby change the way they think and behave. There's a lovely quote, systems move at the speed of trust, and it's absolutely true. If you don't have trust, you start to think about where you're going to get it. And you can take the scenic route. It's fine to have emergent or evolving solutions. You're much more likely to have them as well. It's much better to take a couple of steps, see where you are, and then decide what your next move should be, rather than herring off in pursuit of a strategy where you'd found reality had changed before you were halfway there. And think about double loop learning as well. So not just doing one project at a time, but thinking about the wider systemic lessons that you can draw. So systems leadership is about collaborative leadership, it's about facing complexity head on, and it's about relationships and trust. Now, I'm going to check that you have been listening to what I've been saying because we have a quick poll here. There is a poll of true or false going to come up, I think, on the right-hand side of your screen, and we are going to invite you to say true or false to each of these questions. So first of all, when grappling with complex issues, an effective way to work with them is to ignore the complexity and focus on what your own organisation can do on its own. True or false? And then secondly, relationships and trust are the basics of any systems leadership endeavour. Again, true or false. So I'll just invite you now, the poll questions are up on the right-hand side, just to put true or false to either of those statements. And then we'll see what the answers are. I'll give you a few more seconds. Right, Rachel, can I check in with you again, please, on the responses that we've had?
If we could just give participants another 5 or 10 seconds, that's great. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. Hooray, well done. Brilliant. Systems leaders already. I love it. Thank you all very much. So it's nice to see that you're already learning here. There's a lot of learning about systems leadership and about what works and what doesn't, partly through what the Leadership Centre has done, but it's not just us. The NHS Leadership Academy has done a lot of work in this area. There's the ACT Academy that's part of NHS Improvement, and then we have the large-scale change guide itself. There's an awful lot of information and learning out there.
And I've got the reference to these on the last slide, but I thought what I might do is distill down what I think are kind of 4 key things about how you lead in systems and enable large-scale change. And I wanted to start by saying, know what you're dealing with. Know what a system looks like and how it acts, and how you can make it work for you. Sometimes I'll ask people to describe their system, and they'll describe their organisation and their organisation chart. And the thing about organisation charts is that they tend to be quite linear and quite boxy. You know, you'll have your name and your job title, and you'll be in your box. And you might have some lateral relationships, but they're usually up, down, and across. This is a system. By contrast, much more kinetic, much more chaotic, much harder to read. Don't worry, don't panic. You will never be able to read all the system. It's just too complex. Anybody who says they can is fibbing. They are fibbing to you, and they are fibbing to themselves. But don't be daunted by this. This, incidentally, is the Internet Enrichment in 1992. Can you imagine what it's like now? But don't be daunted by it. See it as something that can actually help you. If you're on the left-hand side of the system and you want to get over to the right-hand side, you can think about who can help you do the heavy lifting here. Who might your allies be? Who might the people be in that network of people with whom you want to work, who can advocate for you? So don't worry about being able to read all the system. The only bit of the system you need to worry about is the bit that you want to change on the basis of your network, of your allies, of your coalition of the willing, and on the basis of your shared endeavour and common purpose. Now, when we think of systems in this way, there's sometimes a tendency to see systems as benign, or at least neutral. Obviously, these are personal tastes. Insert your own photos here. Some systems are benign. However, I should warn you that not all systems are benign, and some of them really are out to get you. This is not just me. Governance is like asbestos. It can kill any initiative stone dead if it's applied at the wrong time. There are a couple of evolutionary biologists who have written on this. And one way to look at a system is to see it as almost like an organism, like an amoeba. So it might not have much of a controlling brain, but it can feed, it can get about, it can reproduce. And, crucially, it is completely adapted to its environment. So you come along, you say, I'd like to change the system, please, for really good rational reasons. So better interprofessional working, better services for citizens, lower costs, better outcomes, whatever it is. The response of the system is not automatically, I have to unfortunately to tell you, to say, that's a fantastic idea, let's adopt that first of all. No, the response of the system is to kill it. So you might get responses like, that's really interesting, I'd love to talk to you about your plans for change, I'd love to meet with you, what about 3 months' time? Or that's is never good for you. Or you might get governance, the G word. Governance at the wrong time is like domestos. It can kill any initiative stone dead. So if you get, in response to your suggestions, that's very interesting, can you tell me the terms of reference? It might well be nothing to do with terms of reference. It might well be because people are scared. People don't necessarily fear loss, fear change, sorry, but they fear loss. So the question to ask is, if I'm working in a system, who is going to lose out, or who might think they're losing out by what I'm suggesting? And it can be loss of culture, loss of identity, loss of status, never mind loss of job and loss of income and loss of everything else. It's really worth being aware of what you're dealing with in a system and how people might be reacting to what you're saying. Because otherwise, you just get very, very puzzled as to why something that is so rational and so obvious to you gets rejected by the system. But it is something to look out for.
So the first thing to do when you're working in a system is to be aware that that's what you're doing. The second thing is to consciously practice systems leadership behaviours. This is not the same thing as being the system leader. This is about supporting and enabling other people. It's about using those behaviours. I sometimes describe systems leadership as leadership for introverts. You don't need to be a diva, you don't need to be insanely charismatic. Much better to be thoughtful and calm and supportive of other people.
And we know what works here. We have commissioned, as part of the National Systems Leadership Programme, national and international research into what goes towards good systems leadership behaviours. And there is an executive summary of the research. The reference is on the last slide, and it really repays reading. It's only about 12 pages long. If you don't have time to read 12 pages, to be honest, you only need to read 2. Pages 6 and 7 talk about 6 dimensions of systems leadership around behaviours and values. So it's about ways of feeling. It is absolutely fine to ground things in your values. And your values, coupled with a shared endeavour, a common purpose, can be what you can hold on to for the long term, whilst you're getting all sorts of short-term demands that you need to feed. It's about ways of perceiving as well. It's about getting off the dance floor and onto the balcony. It's about standing back, thinking, what is actually going on here? What are these people thinking? How are they feeling about this? What am I feeling about this? But it's not just about feelings. It's about doing the hard yards of thinking as well, sense-making of what's happening, thinking about how things might be changed and rearranged. It's about working in ways that support others, particularly at times when time is short and situations are difficult. And it's about behaving in ways that lead to change, particularly around telling emotionally resonant stories, narrative. People say when I say this, oh, that sounds terribly fluffy, or is this a anecdote? Is it I met this bloke down a pub? Well, no, it's not. It's about basing your stories in data, in evidence, but using them to change the way people think. And I wanted to show how this works in practice and in political setting as well. Back in the back end of October of 2015, the government was looking to reduce tax credit thresholds, and it commissioned the IFS, the Institute for Fiscal Studies, to undertake a study for MPs, basically asking, would the introduction of the national minimum wage compensate for a reduction in tax credit? Short answer, no. But done, you can see here, in very, very sober and mathematical language. So very much evidence-based. They talked about deciles, they talked about household income distribution, they talked about scenarios. Now, fast forward to the House of Lords. Baroness Hollis talking about this. Did she talk about deciles? Did she talk about household income distribution? No, she did not. She went for the jugular. She told a story. She read out a letter from a couple in Norwich, father in full-time work, mother caring for two disabled children, who would lose out to a quite specific degree. And then she rammed the point home with a bolt gun. Think of the poor people getting Christmas letters from the Chancellor, she repeated frequently, her voice getting softer by the second. The Christmas letters. Now, you do not need to go through the whole tiny tin on this. This is an extreme example, but I use it because it is extreme, because it just shows you what it is like when you tell a story that really resonates with people and changes the way that people think. So, 2 things, know what you're dealing with and practice systems leadership behaviours.
And think about who in your teams might be good at this as well. Who are the natural systems leaders amongst your teams? Who's good at building relationships? Who's good at empathy? Who can live with a bit of risk? Who can live with a bit of conflict without having a fit of the vapors? Who's really focused on outcomes rather than processes? Everybody's flexible, everybody can work in different ways, but there are going to be some people in your teams who are going to be really good at this, and it's worth encouraging them to think in these ways. The third thing is that you are not starting from scratch. Lots and lots of learning available from others who have been here before you. There are systems leadership programs and projects in about 60 places around the country. Some of them in these two reports here just on the left-hand side. People Helping People, which was the Pioneer program in year 2, and then The Revolution Will Be Improvised. Stories from places about people who've been trying to put this into practice. And lots of learning here. And people are very happy to share their learning as well. So if you read any of these reports and think, actually, I'd love to know what they've been doing in Wakefield or Calderdale or Cornwall, please get in touch with me and I can put you in touch with them. And I won't go through all the points here, but I just want to mention a few of them. Relationships, absolutely at the heart of this. If you've got good relationships, you can weather the most humongous storms. If you haven't, you can have all the strategies and memoranda of understanding that you like. You won't get any change, or you won't get much substantive or long-lasting change. Note, by good relationships, I don't mean that you need to be best friends. It helps if you don't viscerally hate each other, obviously, but this is not about friendship. It's about just enough respect that you can disagree with each other and still keep talking. You can start small. Start with what's real to you. So keep going and just see where it leads. It helps to have senior or political air cover. If something matters to a chief exec, it will tend to matter to everyone else. But don't leave it at senior level. It's got to percolate all the way down. And worth thinking about who else can be your ally here. Public health, especially, can be your friend. Public health people are often real systems leaders. They really get the idea of distributed leadership, and they can be great advocates for you. It is about working with a coalition of the willing and not waiting until you get into a room in a formal meeting to try and build a relationship. Meeting offline informally, going for a coffee with somebody is as much real work as sitting in a meeting. And think about getting away from pilotitis. Don't have a pilot, it will either work or it won't work, and then if it works, you'll try and just sort of spread it everywhere else, irrespective of circumstances. Think about, again, in terms of small changes, fail-safe experiments, small things that you can do, prototype and tweak and make progress. And it's about standing back, observing what's happening, and seeding rather than just trading leadership. If you think somebody else is in a better position to lead than you, you'll have much more control if you allow them to do so. So I think we have another poll coming up. Again, we would invite you to say true or false to the following 3 questions. So first of all, to be effective as a systems leader, I need to be able to read the whole system. Secondly, there are 6 dimensions of systems leadership around behaviors and values, and they are ways of feeling, perceiving, thinking, relating, doing, and being. And then thirdly, narrative and framing are not helpful in complex systems, come across as too woolly.
Okay, I think we're up with the poll results now, Debbie, if you want to take over.
Oh, good stuff. Yep, good stuff. Very nice to see. Very nice to see. Thank you very much. Yes, super learning there. Thank you. Before I just go any further, I just wanted to note, it is not all plain sailing. Lots and lots of stuff can get in the way and will get in the way. culture and history, or a huge, huge issue. If you've got a history of animosity, of poor relationships, you've just got to acknowledge that and either park it or decide how you're going to work with it. We had one situation where a community mental health trust saw the acute trust as the enemy. That was their word, not mine. And they didn't change being the enemy until they got a new COO, and suddenly they could have a conversation and build a relationship. And suddenly they ended up with shared mental health wards that they previously spent 18 months talking about. Nothing else changed, but they managed to find a way to get around the history and to get around the culture. Geography makes a difference as well. Much easier to do things in a small contained geography than in a large, a messy one. And it will take time and it will feel messy. So it will feel really countercultural and it will feel really difficult when you've got really short-term deadlines. And there's something about what you do to feed the beast in the short term while still staying true to your values and common purpose that are going to sustain you in the long. And I hardly need to add some things like political imperatives, you know, having a local MP waving a placard saying save our hospital. It will often trump a broader vision. Key thing is to hold fast to that common purpose and see yourselves as systems leaders beyond your role, helping others to see themselves similarly. See yourselves as people doing that systems leadership role. And there are lots of examples of places around the country. Before I just go any further, I just wanted to note, it is not all plain sailing. Lots and lots of stuff can get in the way and will get in the way of the way. Culture and history, or a huge, huge issue. If you've got a history of animosity, of poor relationships, you've just got to acknowledge that and either park it or decide how you're going to work with it. We had one situation where a community mental health trust saw the acute trust as the enemy. That was their word, not mine. And they didn't change being the enemy until they got a new COO, and suddenly they could have a conversation and build a relationship. And suddenly they ended up with shared mental health wards that they previously spent 18 months talking about. Nothing else changed, but they managed to find a way to get around the history and to get around the culture. Geography makes a difference as well. Much easier to do things in a small contained geography than in a large, a messy one. And it will take time and it will feel messy. So it will feel really countercultural and it will feel really difficult when you've got really short-term deadlines. And there's something about what you do to feed the beast in the short term while still staying true to your values and common purpose that are going to sustain you in the long. And I hardly need to add some things like political imperatives, you know, having a local MP waving a placard saying save our hospital. It will often trump a broader vision. Key thing is to hold fast to that common purpose and see yourselves as systems leaders beyond your role, helping others to see themselves similarly. See yourselves as people doing that systems leadership role. And there are lots of examples of places around the country where this is happening. Not to go in detail into all of these, but in North Merseyside, they came to a common purpose on their A&E delivery board that worked across not just the NHS, but social care and other sectors. More people in the right place at the right time to meet their needs. So they really feel like they are all in it together and they can actually have a common purpose that they can do, so they can all work towards. And they have the local authority then supporting the trust and working with the trust. It's about connecting services as well. If you have a look at Wakefield Pioneer and their connecting care hubs, this has meant, for example, that a referral that used to take a week now takes a day. That's a real bonus for a patient. It's about joining up the workforce as well, mapping where people are and where they might work together better. And Leeds has done a lot of work around this. And you can also use it for data sharing as well. A lot of the stuff around data, people frankly make up from their heads. If you can actually get people to work together on this, as in Waltham Forest, they developed a shared record that they can use across primary and secondary care and social care and other services. So it is about learning from what's out there. And it's just about doing, really. The key thing is to start. This only makes sense in practice. There's a man called Myron Rogers who has some lovely maxims that I think people should paste to the wall. People know what they create. Much better to get change by getting people to work on it themselves rather than just having to accept something from on high. And it's the people who will do the work that will actually do the change. Start small, start anywhere, follow it everywhere. Keep making the connections in your system and do something different, because the process we use to get to the future determines the future we get. If we keep doing things in the same way, we shouldn't be surprised if we get the same outcomes. So, practice taking your first steps, using values, building relationships, starting from where you are, have coffee with people, choose your battles. Don't have formal meetings unless it's really useful, if it's going to change something. And use narratives, emotionally resonant stories, and framing to change perspectives. And I just wanted to spend the last bit of this talking about framing, because I think this is really, really important and can help you. Some of you may recognize this person. This is Leonard Rossiter as Reggie Perrin. In this photo, Reggie has just thought of his mother-in-law. What has he thought of? Those of you who thought immediately of the word hippo are absolutely right. Reggie has thought of a hippo. A hippo, for these purposes, is a frame. A frame is a mental shortcut. It's a set of internalized concepts and values that allow us to accord meaning to information, to people, to organizations, to events. Often based in metaphor, they affect the way we think, and they are often grounded in very deeply held values or emotions. So this is how, for example, an acute trust will view the local authority, and vice versa. It's about how people working in mental health might view GPs or might view people working in A&E. They are nothing to do with facts. They are nothing to do with rationality. We all do this, and they will take precedence over facts and rationality pretty much every time. Once you've got a frame in your head, you will see everything in that frame pretty much. And anybody from that organization, you will tend to see them in the same way. Because they're continuously reinforced, they can be hard to shift. But the great thing is, they're not immutable. They can change. And once a new frame becomes established and becomes widely accepted, the previously unthinkable becomes common sense. And I put a quote up here from Ken Clark about the Iraq War. He sided with Robin Cook, and then 12 months later couldn't find anybody who was in favour of it. Even strongly held frames can change. And if you think this isn't for you, it really is. No one is above this. I've put the quote here, retaliate first. This is a line from Tommy Docherty. Football fans amongst you might remember him. He was a football manager in the 70s and 80s, and he was asked what would happen if the opposing team retaliated against his, and he said, we'll retaliate first. This is about getting your frame in first. It's not about competing fictions, but it is about thinking long and hard about the frame you want to establish. Because once a frame is established, you can't negate it. If you just say, no, it isn't, all you'll do is reinforce it. So you need to think about how you're going to work with the frame that's there in order to shift it if you want to get large-scale change. And I've just put up here, these are frames, these are absolutely frames, the way people will perceive a situation and how that will colour the way they react to it. And it's worth thinking also about who you're going to get
or work with to get your message across. It might not be you. It might be a clinician, it might be another manager, it might be someone from social care or the local authority. Sometimes the messenger often is the message. I've been in meetings, said something, you can watch it going over people's heads. Somebody else has said exactly the same thing and suddenly they're a genius. It's really frustrating, but it's worth thinking about who is in the best position to get your message across when you're trying to get large-scale change established. So I just wanted to sum up at this stage what I think leading in systems might mean for you and how it might help you enable large-scale change. Well, first of all, this can really help, I think, in finding new ways of working and building new relationships with people. See yourselves as people who practice systems leadership and part of a wider system. You're enabling and supporting other people. It is about the behaviours and the values, the shared ambition, the shared endeavour. What do we want services to be like for people in our place? It's about starting from where you are, using stories and framing, building relationships and alliances, small coalition of the willing to start with, and just keep going and meeting informally. Absolutely, patients right at the centre, right from the off. And recognise that there are going to be setbacks. Stuff is going to get in the way. Sometimes you need to choose your battles, you know. It's just the wrong time and the wrong place and the wrong people, and it might be better to start somewhere else. But keep going. Truly, if you take the scenic route, if you have a shared endeavour, if you've got a coalition of the willing, if you're willing to look for progress rather than solutions, the progress can add up. And it really is possible to see large-scale change in places. I wanted to ask people now if they wanted to think about issues that they wanted to raise in the chat box or afterwards, and also to think about the issues that you're dealing with at the moment that are complex and that you might want to take to the next webinar in this series, which is going to look at some of these things in more detail. I have included as part of this what to do now, but this is an exercise in reframing that you can carry out with your teams. It's deceptively simple, but by God, it's effective. It's really worth doing. And these are just references to more information on systems leadership, including the systems leadership behaviours, and the revolution will be improvised. I'd also really flag up both two things. One is called the art of change making. Lots and lots of ways of working there, approaches, models that we've found useful in our work in getting change off the ground, and the large scale change guide itself, which really does what it says on the tin. I think I've spoken enough, frankly. I'm going to stop there and ask if there are any questions or thoughts that people have that they'd like to put forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Debbie. It's Elaine back here. Super session, and thanks for playing through the sound issues as well. And we've had some really, really live and interactive chats going on in the chat box with people sharing ideas and thoughts, and also asking some questions as well. So I'm going to come to my colleague, Michael Anderson, who's been gathering themes for us in the background, hopefully. So we've just got sort of 5 minutes or so, and we can go back to some of those queries. So Michael, if we can just pick up what's come through in the chat box.
Yeah, we've had loads of stuff come in, which has been really good, and people answering other people's questions, which has been really great to see. One of the core themes that's come up a few times is around time to do some of this stuff, and that the NHS is obviously shrouded in time restraints, and things need to be done quickly before governments change or before policies change or whatever. So what would be your tips on sort of how to manage that, Debbie, when you're trying to implement some of this stuff?
Every time we've brought people together in workshops or just a little bit of time out,
Everybody has said, God, it's so good to have some time for reflection here. And believe me, we know how difficult it is. The pressures are enormous and they're ramping up at the moment. What we've found is most useful is to try and tack some of this onto existing meetings rather than trying to build new things into the system. So if there are, for example, any delivery board meetings, we've met there rather than try and just add to people's workloads. But I think there's also something to do with taking agency here. There's an American called Meg Wheatley who writes really well on leadership and systems leadership matters. And she says that the job of leadership is about finding islands of sanity and pushing back sometimes. You know, do you need, I know in one place they were having 4 phone calls a day with a CCG, between a trust and a CCG. Really? Is that making any difference? Is there a way to push back and say, do you need this data? Is it actually adding to your understanding here? It's really difficult to do, but there is something also about, as well as pushing back, thinking about what do we need to do in the short term to feed the beast, but what do we really want to do here over the longer term? Because there will always be another initiative along in a minute. There will be something else coming down the line. What do we want services to be like for people in our place? And what do we need to do in order to hold fast to what we want to do? I'm not saying, believe me, I'm not saying any of this is easy, but it is something that we've found has really worked in places, particularly if you can get to a common purpose that you all sign up to, because then things tend to roll out much more smoothly and you find you have the time rather than always checking up on each other. Just to also mention, Michael, I'd be very happy if people want to email or talk to me in some other way to contact them directly.
Brilliant. Yeah, there's definitely some more questions flying in that I don't think we're going to have time to cover. So we'll point people towards the NHS Networks collaboration space, and hopefully we can get people talking on there. And if you don't mind popping on there answering some questions, that would be really useful. How are we doing for time? Do I have time to ask another one, or do we need to start?
Yeah, we're getting close to the end now. So I think if we've got one more sort of quick high-level theme, we just need to probably cover that in 1 minute or so.
Okay. I mean, there's a question from Deborah here that's talking about some practical tools on taking on systems leadership, taking on a systems leadership approach, and looking at the theory of practice, because they don't have any resources at the moment to do that. Can you recommend anything quickly to do that?
Yes. Deborah, if you can send me your details, I will send you a copy of The Art of Change Making and some other resources which will suggest how you might get going.
Great. Again, they might be really useful to stick onto the collaboration space.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Debbie. And I think we'll put the rest of the questions online, and we'll make sure we cover everybody's, because a lot of people have asked them there at the end, but we haven't got time right now to answer them.
Okay. Yes. So apologies if I went on too long, but thank you all very much for being such an involved and thoughtful audience as well.
No, thank you, Debbie. So that's been a super session and covered a lot of broad thinking around systems, leadership, and shared very many of your insights and what you know about what's happening across the system. So huge thanks from us. There's been lots of really positive feedback in the chat box. As we say, we will pick up on all of this in the collaboration space so that we don't leave any questions unanswered. So thank you for that, Debbie. Very briefly, just to let everybody know what's coming next. Next week will be our second session on leading large-scale change, which is run on the 8th of November between 12:30 and 1:30. So you're all very, very welcome to attend. And if you haven't yet registered, the link is available, and we're popping that in the chat box for you now. So please do join in, and huge thanks for getting involved today and for sharing your thoughts and your stories with us. Lovely to see people interacting with each other and actually answering each other's questions, as Michael said, in various spaces. So that's superb. We're getting a nice little community going. The collaboration space that we have has already got 70 or 80 odd members, so please do join in, and you can all carry on your conversations with one another. And also we have recorded today's session, complete with all the lovely sound tips in and out. So you'll be able to access the session and go back in and re-listen to the content and pick out all the key nuggets through that collaboration space, along with catching up on all of the slides and the other practical resources that we've shared with you through that collaboration space. So very last thing, just before we close on time for 1:30, we also have a quick poll that we'd like to run at the end of this session, and a learning knowledge quiz. The quiz will help to embed your learning from today's session, and the survey will help us to make sure that we carry on improving these WebExes for you. So please do take the opportunity to complete that if you wouldn't just mind. And I think that's just about it. So huge thanks to everybody, the team behind the scenes, and especially to yourself, Debbie. Super session. Thank you very much indeed. Anything you'd like to close with at all, Debbie?
Thank you. No, just to say thank you very much. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me, and thank you very much for all your feedback. We'll have some sessions coming up, systems leadership masterclasses and surgeries. So keep an eye out for those as well, because they might also be able to help.
Yep, super, and we'll be publicising those soon. Okay, it's bang on 1:30, so thank you everybody, and we'll look forward to meeting with you all next week.